Lin Xiaoyu opened the door of the design company, and the sunlight came from the glass windows and shone on her excited face. Her backpack hit the door frame lightly, making a slight collision sound, and the tube did not reduce her enthusiasm. In the office building, the bright lights and the warm sunshine at noon in summer create a busy vitality. She breathed a sigh of relief, and the air was filled with the aroma of coffee and the faint smell of the printer's hot ink. The background is the rhythm of the staff's whispers and keyboards, like a familiar urban symphony. Lin Xiao opened his pace and replied quickly on the smooth floor. She walked to the front desk and sent the entry documents to the smiling staff member. "Hey, I'm the new Lin Xiaoyu," she said, with a slut in her voice. "I'm very excited to join this company. I've always dreamed of becoming a designer, hoping to make some creative works that will surprise everyone." The staff responded with their heads, and the office's phone rings kept ringing, like a rushing beater that moment. Lin Xiaoyu followed his staff into the open office, his ears filled with conversations from colleagues and the buzzing sound of coffee machines moving. Each step brought her closer to this dream world. Her eyes swept across the computer screen around her, and the flashing blue light reflected in her eyes. Soon, she was taken to the simplified room. Lin Xiaoyu stood on the lecture platform and gently touched the projector's turn-on with his fingers. The screen lights up, accompanied by the low wings of the fan, and she begins to talk about the design concept. The air in the room seemed to be slightly condensed, and the audience came to the light scraping sound of the chair moving. She tried to keep the picture fixed, but got stuck at the key moment. "Wait, I seem to have forgotten the key data," she said in a panic, her slight trembling in her speech. "This design concept is about continuous fashion, but, well, it's urban greening, sorry." The phantom lights jumped wrong, and the atmosphere in the room became awkward in an instant. The colleagues exchanged their eyes, and some people coughed lightly, and the sound was particularly harsh in the silence. A hint of redness appeared on Lin Xiaoyu's face. She hurriedly searched for the notebook, and the paper rustled, like the echo of her heartbeat. She bit her lower lip and tried to save her, but she felt that the time was getting longer. At this moment, a steady sound of footsteps came from outside the door. The company's president Chen Zimo walked into the briefing room, and his leather shoes hit the floor, and every step seemed to declare his authority. He looked at the whole scene coldly, his eyes slightly as the frost of the cold winter, as he swept to the forest. The low voice in the room came to an abrupt end, with only the ticking of a clock remaining, which stressed the invisible pressure. Lin Xiaoyu raised his head and his chest suddenly became tight. She recognized that face in her eyes. She was her childhood playmate. As a sensation as a warm current swayed over her, her hands slid unconsciously towards her backpack, and she took out the childhood memories diary from it. Turn on the page, the paper rubs gently, accompanied by blurry clips of children's laughter in the sea of brain. She froze, the world seemed to be calm. Chen Zimo maintained a cold attitude, and his voice roared in the room. "The brief report is paused. This error cannot be explained, but we need to learn it. Lin Xiaoyu, pay attention to details next time." His words pointed directly at the key points like a stolen sword, revealing a certain protection idea. Lin Xiaoyu lowered his head, and his heart was filled with waves. She murmured, her voice so low that it was almost drowned by the noise around her. "Oh my God, he is Chen Zimo. We agreed to start a company together when we were young, and I can't mess it up anymore." The briefing room gradually dissipated, and people returned to their seats, and the sound of the keyboard rose again, like rain hitting the window. Lin Xiaoyu returned to her desk, and she sat down and calmly inhaled fresh air. Outside the window, the company building stands under the summer sun, casting a long shadow. The colleagues' low discussions were transmitted from the next door. "I heard that the company is in fierce competition," said colleague A to another. "If this briefing is not smooth, someone may be transferred." This sentence is like a cold wind, passing through the forest's ears. She closed the diary, and her fingertips still had the touch of paper. A warm light flashed on the face, which was a spark that was recalled. She looked out the window, thinking as if she was flying away like a cloud, feeling the challenges and possibilities of the future. The wave of jobs just began, and she knew that childhood agreements would be her guide to progress. Lin Xiaoyu closed the diary and touched the old marks on the cover with his fingers, as if the paper's texture still retained the remaining childhood warmth. She stood up slowly, her eyes crossed the desk and fell on the summer sun that was rising outside the window. The golden light was as soft as a silk thread, brushing her face, making her take a deep breath, and the anxiety in her chest turned into a heart of determination. She turned around, her steps were quick and anxious, and walked towards the meeting room. In the air in the office, the aroma of coffee intersects with the knocking sound of the keyboard to form an invisible net, wrapping her in a tight rhythm. The high heels whispered back to the corridor with crisp sounds of knocking on the ground, accompanied by the low words of her colleagues from a distance, urging her to move forward like a shaped drum. Lin Xiaoyu pushed open the door in the meeting room, and the door slid its hands across her palm. A cold touch reminded her that she would not be lost at this moment. She walked in, her shoulders slightly straightened, unable to completely suppress the trembling of her palms. In the room, the projector's fan buzzed low, like a waiting wilderness. The colleagues had sat down and looked at her. Someone pointed at her and some looked down and some looked at her. Lin Xiaoyu took a deep breath, pressed the projection switch, the screen lighted up, and the picture jumped up suddenly. The images of the color spots flashed continuously, and her heartbeat accelerated, and a heat tide appeared on her face. In a panic, she tried to click the mouse, which only made the error more eye-catching. The air seemed to solidify, and the lights around her shone dazzlingly on her, exposing her confusion. "I'm sorry, everyone," Lin Xiaoyu's voice trembled slightly, with a strong sense of confidence. "My file just now is a bit chaotic, but this is the latest creation of our team, and I promise it will surprise customers." She bit her lower lip and tried to calm her words, feeling sweat slipping from her palms. The colleagues exchanged their eyes, and some people coughed, and the sound was particularly harsh in the silence. The projector's buzz continued, like a joke about her mistake. Just as she was busy searching for a backup, a steady sound of footsteps came from outside the door. Chen Zimo walked into the meeting room, his leather shoes stepped on the floor, making a steady echo, and every step seemed to declare unquestionable authority. He looked at the whole scene, his eyes were as cold as the frost in winter, and he was slightly tilted when he was touching the forest. The sound of the air conditioning in the room suddenly became clear, as if it was shaping the hidden tightness. Chen Zimo stopped walking and inserted his hands into the pants bag, maintaining a cold posture on the surface. "The brief content needs to be more precise." His voice was low and a little magnetic, sweeping through the room like a wind. "Don't waste time on errors. Assistant, help her reset it." His words point to the point, revealing a certain protection idea. The assistant quickly stepped forward, clicked the keyboard, and the projectors buzzing down smoothly. Lin Xiaoyu held the pen in his hand tightly and felt a warm current rising from his chest. She glanced secretly at Chen Zimo. He had turned around and received a call from the office. The sharp sound of the sound broke the awkward atmosphere. In the background, the sound of the coffee machine ticking was like a gentle rain, giving her breathing space. Taking advantage of this gap, Lin Xiaoyu reorganized his thoughts. Her pen tip was plotted on the paper, and a slight rustling sound was like writing a quick song. She adjusts the projection, changes the pictures smoothly, and gradually develops the design concept. The atmosphere in the room changed slowly, and the eyes of colleagues changed from doubt to interest. The sunlight penetrated through the window, casting warm light and shadow, and outlining a confident silhouette on her face. "This is an innovative solution for urban greening," she continued, verbalizing gradually. "We incorporate the everlasting elements into the design to make the city more livable." The sound of the palms rose like waves, swaying in the meeting room, accompanied by the light scraping of the chair moving. Lin Xiaoyu straightened his waist and felt a long-lasting sense of accomplishment rushing into his heart. At the end of the meeting, she lowered her head to pack up the information, and her ears were still blaming her colleagues for their advice. Walking out of the meeting room, the noise of the office re-encircled her. Just as she was about to return to her seat, a rush of high heels sounded from the hall. The door creaked and she pushed the door in, her eyes locked Lin Xiaoyu like a searchlight. "Xiao." Are you okay? Gu Shimi's voice was anxious. She pulled Lin Xiaoyou's arm and brought her to the lunch area. The sound of the microwaved beehive blurred their conversation in the background, and the coffee aroma became more intense. Lin Xiaoyu sat down, rubbed the son's acupoint, and tried to suck in heartbeat. He always helps, she said lightly, her eyes flashing with a flash of gratitude. I don't know why, but he made me feel that everything was not bad. Gu Qingmi raised her eyebrows, raised her lips slightly, and there was a hint of vigilance. Xiaoyu, don't be stupid. Her words were as straightforward as an arrow. Why does this cold-faced president always help you secretly? Be careful that he doesn't have intentions, and don't let childhood memories blind the judgment. Lin Xiaoyu was stunned, his fingers unconsciously scouring the edge of the diary. Outside the window, the noise of the car flow is like a low musical chapter, mixed with the birds from afar, creating a kind of urban romance. She bit her lip, and her heart was filled with waves. Guanmi's words were like a cold wind, reminding her not to ignore potential risks. At the end of get off work, the lights in the office dimmed and the shadows stretched to the floor. Lin Xiaoyu returned to her seat and flipped out her diary. The page rubs gently, bringing out a clip of childhood, the vague smile, and Chinzimo's promise. Her eyes were flashing, and she felt a complex feeling spreading in her chest. Outside the window, the sun was still red in the sky. Her eyes followed Chinzimo's distant back. He murmured alone, his voice was swallowed by the light reel on the door. She is still so confused, but I can't let her know my promise, otherwise everything will be a mess. Lin Xiaoyu closed the diary, with the warm touch of the paper still remaining in the palm. The office was as quiet as a thin layer, wrapped around her inner curiosity and emotions, gradually awakening, laying a foundation for her future relationship exams. In the night, the city's lights began to light up, like a drama about to unfold. Lin Xiaoyou's eyes closed at the door of the office. The door closed and swallowed Chinzimo's back. The night crawled in through the window glass, and the city's lights were like a string of distinct pearls, shining slightly in the dark. She took a deep breath, her chest undulating slightly, and the low buzzing bird was like a shaped tide, gently sucking her skin. She slowly opened her diary again, slid her fingertips over the yellow page, and the familiar touch was like a key, quietly opening the dust-sealed memory door. The soft friction of the paper slightly roared in the quiet office, as if carrying the autumn wind. The picture appears in her brain, the park of childhood, the fallen leaves dance in the sun, and the child's smile is like a clear bird intertwined. She saw herself and the young Chinzimo swaying on the swing, his little hands tightly holding the ropes, and pure passion in his eyes. The wind lingers from the branches, and the crisp tingling sound accompanied by the lightness of the leaves. Everything is so warm, but it also brings a piece of regret that is difficult to touch. The memory rippled like water waves. She blinked and closed the diary, her fingers still stayed on the side of the page, and the watch was like an uncatchable phantom. The phone suddenly vibrated, and the sound was particularly harsh in the air. She picked up her cell phone, and the light of the screen reflected on her tired face. The message of the company party jumped out, and the words simply brought a sense of enthusiasm that could not be recommended. She stood up, and the office chair shaved lightly across the floor, making a slight echo. The lights in the office stretched out her shadow. She grabbed her coat, took a look at the silhouette, and walked towards the hall. In the corridor, the laughter and music scenes from afar have begun to exude the party's atmosphere, like a hidden line that pulls her towards the unknown. The conference room has changed its shape, with a gorgeous decoration replacing the daily simplicity. The colorful lights dance on the wall, projecting spotted lights and shadows, and the light and fast pop jazz flows out from the sound, mixing the laughter of colleagues and the crisp sound of the collision of wine glasses. The air was filled with the fragrant fruity aroma, and the sweetness was slightly sour, stimulating her senses. Lin Xiaoyu walked into the crowd, her steps were a little confused. Her fingers unconsciously held the cup in her hand, and the cold touch of the glass made her feel a little bit back. She looked around, and the lights moved in her eyes, reflecting a familiar face, some laughing and some talking in a whisper. The hot-blooded colleague Xiao Ming came over the crowd. His smile was like a group of jumping flames, and his voice was loud enough to over the background music. "Xiaoyu, you finally come," he said, moving his hands along the rhythm, as if pointing at an invisible team. "The company is not as harmonious as it seems on the surface. There are two major factions. One is the conservative designers who stick to the old rules, the other is our innovative young team. The competition is so fierce, not just work, but also hidden grudges. You have to be careful not to be trapped." Lin Xiaoyu took a sip of the fragrance, and her breath burst out on the tip of her tongue, bringing a refreshing stimulation. She pointed her head, her eyes flashed with a sense of alertness, but also a little curious. "Thank you for your reminder, Xiao Ming." Her voice was soft, with the waves hidden in her heart. She secretly slapped around, the lights blurred in her vision, and then her eyes stopped in the corner. Chinzimo stood there, holding the wine glass, buckled the glass with his fingers, and his posture seemed casual, revealing his inner warning. The laughter and music from far away resounded in his ears, as if he had just woken up the scene of the dust seal. His eyes softened a little, and the corners of his mouth moved slightly, as if he was savoring a clip of his childhood. Lin Xiaoyu approached inadvertently, and the eyes of the two met in the light. At that moment, the air seemed to solidify, the noise of the background gradually blurred into whispers, leaving only each other's breathing. She wanted to avoid it, but accidentally knocked down the decoration beside her. A bang sounded, attracting the surrounding gaze. She was stunned, and she quickly helped the small trunk up with her hands, her heartbeat as fast as a drum. Chinzimo took a step forward, his figure magnified in front of her eyes. He stretched out his hand to hold her arm, and the two of them approached, and the warm touch made her froze slightly. The background music is still flowing, as if it is coming from afar. "Xiaoyu," Chinzimo opened his mouth, his voice low, carrying a spectacular magnetism. "I have never forgotten some things, but the past move was not my choice. It hides unknown reasons. I just want to know why you are still obsessed with those memories." Lin Xiaoyu's fingers unconsciously touched the diary in her pocket, and the slid sound of the page was rumbling in her brain, reappearing the clip of her childhood like an echo. She bit her lower lip, and her eyes flashed with pain. "ZMO, do you still remember our appointment in the park when we were young? The dream of starting a company together felt like yesterday, with a burst of pain." Her words were gentle, like a wind, brushing the barrier in his heart. Xiao Ming interjected from the side, his voice snuggling around the rhythm of the music. "There are two major factions within the company, one is a conservative designer, and the other is an innovative young team. Be careful, it's easy. The competition here is not only about work, but also involves many hidden grievances." He snatched his hands and smiled generously, which made the atmosphere more intense. Lin Xiaoyu turned to Chinzimo, trying to figure out the invisible pressure. "Xiao Ming, thank you for your reminder. I will be careful. But, Zimo, when I see you, I feel that my childhood warm promise has come alive again." Her eyes were soft, and the light casts a warm silhouette on her face, and her heart is like waves. Chinzimo's eyes were deep. He slightly pointed his head, and the wine glass moved in his hand, making a slight collision sound. "Things of the past are always complicated," he said, sounding like night winds passing by, leaving endless rest. The distance between the two people was a little closer, but it seemed to be separated by a thin fog. The party continued, the music rose and fell, and the laughter of colleagues fell like a tide. As the music became weak, the lights cast a long shadow. Lin Xiaoyu held the diary tightly and felt the edges of the paper sting slightly in her palm. She glanced at Chinzimo, who had turned around and merged into the crowd, and the back reminded her of the swing of her childhood and the unfinished promise. Outside the window, the city's lights shine, like a soundless drama, indicating possible misunderstandings in the future. She took a deep breath, and the fragrance was still on her lips, and the scent in her heart receded like a tide, leaving no thoughts. In the night, everything flows quietly. Lin Xiaoyu walked out of the party's shadow, holding the yellow diary, with the rough touch of the paper at her fingertips. She glanced at Chinzimo's back as she left, and the figure seemed to melt into the lights in the corridor, leaving behind an unfinished thought. The morning sun had quietly climbed up to the office glass window, and the soft golden light underneath it stretched her figure. She pushed the door of the conference room, and the handle made a crisp click sound, instantly opening the prelude to the new day. Indoors, the team members surrounded the conference table, with design sketches and several mid-empty coffee cups scattered on the table. The knocking sound of the keyboard fell like rain, mixing the groaning of the coffee machine far away, creating a busy rhythm. The bitter aroma of coffee is filled with the air, accompanied by the sound of car horns on the street outside the window, reminding the city of never sleep. Xiaoyu sat down on the chair, her body slightly sinking into the wall. She flipped open the notebook, slid her fingertips over the page, and made a soft friction sound. The sound was like a warm current, awakening the sleeping thoughts. Team members began to discuss in a slight manner that the order the company received came from a customer who called a time toy collector, who wanted to design a product that combines childhood dolls and modern technology. The laughter was rumbling in the conference room, and a practical student, Lee, excitedly swept his hands and made plans, as if his hands were drawing a picture in the air. We can add cartoon elements to make it liven up. He was still stumbled in the air, accidentally knocking over the water cup, and the crisp ding sounded, and the water splashed up, causing a burst of hilariousness. Xiaoyu raised his head from the noise, and his originally confused eyes gradually condensed into a group of fire. She took a deep breath, and the aroma of coffee slipped over the tip of her nose, making her thoughts clearer. "This design is not just a customer's request," she said, her voice carrying a sense of confidence, like a stream of streams flowing into the river. "It reminds me of the happy times I was a child. We can use the elements of childhood dolls to incorporate modern technology to make it more emotionally connected. This is my goal for creativity." Her words were fixed and her fingers hit the notebook lightly, knocking out rhythmic beats. The team leader was slightly lit up, and the corner of his mouth sneered, "Xiaoyu, your creativity is great. From a vegetable bird to a design master, the success of this project depends entirely on your confidence and tricks." His encouragement was like a warm wind, blowing away the tightness in the air. In the meeting room, the team members rushed towards the whiteboard, scratching the surface with the tip of the pen, making a rapid scratch sound. The car horn outside the window occasionally enters like a drum in the distance, reminding the passage of time. When the discussion entered the climax, a squeak sound came from the door, and Shinzimo pushed the door in. His figure occupies the door frame, and his cold eyes swept through the room like a cold wind. The team members paused for a moment. He didn't say much, but walked straight to Xiaoyu and pulled her to the side. The sound of the footsteps in the corridor was rumbling around the two. "Your idea is good," he said softly, lying in a hilarious warmth, "but consider the customer's weird preferences and add more interactive functions. Remember, when we were young, we made an appointment to create something together, and I'm just helping you to achieve a little bit now." His words swept over the night wind, with familiar magnetism. Xiaoyu's fingers held the notebook indelibly, and the paper stinged slightly to the palm. She responded with a flash of gratitude in her eyes, but she didn't say much. Far away, the team's palms and the scratches of the whiteboard pen continued, like the rustic words in the background. Xiaoli poked his head out of the corner of the conference room. His breathing was so light that it was almost invisible, but it was particularly harsh in the silence. He secretly listened to the conversation between the two, his eyes slightly widened. "Wow, the boss and sister Xiaoyu seem to have some secrets," he murmured, his voice as if it was light. "Their dialogue sounds super familiar. Are they old-fashioned? I have to tell everyone, this company is so interesting." His excitement was like a group of flames, quietly igniting the gossip in the air. The team's brains continued to rush, and the office was full of vitality. Xiaoyu's design gradually took shape. She outlined the wheels on the whiteboard, danced with the tip of the pen, accompanied by the rhythm of the keyboard. When the final plan came out, a sound of my palm burst out, someone opened the fragrance, and the bang sound was rumbling in the room, bubbles rose like stars, and the sweet fruity fragrance spread in the air. Xiaoyu stood up and showed the design. The blue light from the computer screen reflected on her face, making her smile even more brilliant. "Well done, it's so easy," Chinzimo said, his eyes softening a little. Don't forget, the job is not just about competition. When you look back at your childhood, that's the real source of spirituality. She turned to him, her eyes meeting under the lights in the office. At that moment, the lights in the city outside the window lit up, like a soundless drama. Xiaoyu's hand flipped open the diary, and the page emitted a gentle whisper, bringing another warm memory. The laughter and palms in the room faded away, leaving only the ripples in her heart, indicating the coming challenges and misunderstandings. In the night, everything flows quietly. Lin Xiaoyu pulled out of the sound of the meeting room, holding the diary tightly in his hand, and the ink on the paper shone faintly under the light. She glanced at Chinzimo. He was wearing a coat with a silky invitation in his eyes. The two left the building together, and the automatic door at the entrance quietly slid open, and a night wind blew, bringing the noise of the streets far away. She carried her photo bag and hit the cement floor with high heels, creating a crisp rhythm, like hidden drums reverberating on the empty trail. Chinzimo followed behind, his leather shoes took steady steps, intersecting with the low-roaring cars around him, as if he was looking for a breath in the rhythm of the city. The street lights stretched their shadows, and the two walked along the sidewalk. The joy of joy was like a warm tide rising. She adjusted the camera on her shoulders, and the lens reflected the golden yellow of the light. "Come on," she said, her words tuning as fast as a clip's recollection, "let's go there and find some spiritual feeling." Chinzimo pointed his head, and the corners of his mouth were slid, and the smile was hidden in the night, which was almost impossible to figure out. He didn't say much, but just speeded up his pace, and their shadows stretched and interspired under the lights of the shops on the road. Soon, they came to the entrance of the park, and vines were lying on the iron stave, scattering the smell of soil and leaves. Xiaoyu stopped walking, took out the diary from his bag, slid his fingertips over the cover, and the paper rubbed gently to make a sound. She flipped through a page and pointed to a vague sketch. It was the timely game facilities, and the lines were like the dream of childhood. "ZMO, do you still remember that we were chasing here when we were young? Is the pretender an adventurer?" Her voice was curious and resolute, trying to narrow the distance that was blurred by time. "I kept hiding the promise at that time in my heart. Now that I have reappeared I feel that everything is so real. I really want to rely on you." Chinzimo's shoulders first became stiff, and then the corners of his mouth were slid, like a quietly blooming flower. "I never forget those days," he said, speaking with a warm evening. "That promise is my power, but I have not explained some things clearly. The competition within the company has made me cold. I don't want you to feel alone anymore. Let's face it together." His words scattered in the night wind, with the low birds on the streets far away, and the city's movements continue. The grass in the park extends and leaves, and the spots of light and shadow are under the moonlight. Xiaoyu pulled Chinzimo's arm and began to imitate the game he was a child. She jogged, her skirt swaying in the wind, and her laughter was as bright as a silver flap, blending with the lightness of the falling leaves. Chinzimo followed, his breathing became more rapid and he had a soft smell. He reached out and tried to capture her, like the pursuit that year. Suddenly, I quickly stepped forward and slanted, and a light sound came from the ground. Chinzimo quickly stepped forward and held her shoulder. Their distance was instantly closer, and their breathing was in contact with the air. At that moment, Xiaoyu's eyes were flashing like stars. She did not retreat, but just looked at them calmly. Chinzimo's hand stopped on her arm, and a warm touch came from her palm. The two moved to the bench and sat down. Xiaoyu flipped out the diary again, and the page slipped slowly and accompanied by the whisper of the night. She continued to share those clips of Chinyan, and the sound flowed like a stream. "Remember that time we pretended to explore the forest? Everything was so free." Chinzimo heard, his fingertips touched her shoulders, and the action was like soundless comfort. In the background, pedestrians chatting and laughing sounds drifted away, like a layer of reminiscence, bringing a warmth. They stood up, couldn't help but start and take a walk along the park. The fragrance of the coffee shop on the street is mixed with bitterness and night wind, and it cannot cover up the waves in my heart. She suddenly stopped and flipped through the page of her diary, and the text was blurred like an old shadow. Seeing this, she said, her voice slightly vibrant, I suddenly remembered the reason for that split. Is there any error? But now, I think we can start over. Her heartbeat hit her chest, and Chinzimo noticed the strangeness. He patted her back and conveyed the stable power in his palm. Yes, I admit that I had regrets in the past, Chinzimo said, his eyes softening, but your creativity has allowed me to see hope. From now on, I will support you in the company, no longer just the boss. His words were like a ray of dawn, illuminating the streets in the night. They continued to move forward, their pace gradually synchronized, and the sound of the heels hitting the ground was like a harmonious beat, accompanied by the surrounding flutes and the noise of the night market. When they returned to the streets near the company, the city lights were already lit up. Chinzimo turned to Xiaoyu and took the initiative to propose a plan for the next cooperation. We will continue brainstorm next time, he said, his verbal sturdy, your point always lights everything. He slowly slapped his head, closing the Japanese notebook in his hand, and the murmurs of the paper dissipated in the night wind. She raised her head toward the company building. The lights were as bright as a torch, suggesting the inner competition. The figures of the two people grew under the street lights, gradually blending into the night of the city, leaving behind an unsolved thought. Lin Xiaoyu and Chinzimo's backs became blurred under the street lights. They opened the rotation door of the company's building, giving the morning light like a tide. The office lights lit up a roar, like the city's movements awakened again, their steps slid lightly on the smooth marble floor, and the echoes blended into the surrounding low voices. The design department office welcomes a new day. Outside the floor-to-ceiling window, the morning light is coming in, and the documents and coffee cups on the conference table are dyed yellow. Lin Xiaoyu's team members were sitting around the table, with the sound of the pen and keyboard in their hands making clear rhythms. She took out the diary from her bag on her shoulder, touched the cover with her fingertips, and the pages rustled, and the sound seemed to awaken the hidden spirit. The sunlight reflected a flash of flicker on the lens. She took a deep breath and opened her mouth to inspire everyone with the aroma of morning coffee. Everyone, we can't be scared by these little problems. Her voice was filled with enthusiasm, like a warm current injecting into the room. Remember our agreement when we were young? Use creative battles to defeat everything, so that we can turn this draft into our stage. She pointed to the design sketch on the projection screen, the hand flowed vigorously, and the lines on the sketch flashed slightly under the light. The team members slammed their heads, and their palms sounded, and a snorted with a stingy tongue. Her eyes swept to Chinzimo's office, and her eyes were like a hidden thorn. In the air in the office, the smell of ink and the bitterness of coffee are intertwined, and the noise of the car outside the window is like a drum in the distance, reminding the urgency of time. An experienced designer suddenly stood up, and his chair squeaked protests on the floor. Lin Xiaoyu, your plan is too empty. He spoke with sharp tongue and his eyebrows were tightly locked. We need a stable style, not these fantasies. If this continues, it will only make us lose the comparison. His words were like stones throwing into the pond, stirring up a circle of ripples, and the discussion in the room came to an abrupt end. The coffee cup in the hand of Sol Sheng accidentally slipped off and hit the file on the table. The sound of the shattered cup was crisp and harsh, and the coffee liquid was scattered, dyeing a few pictures of the straw. He stood there, his face pale, and murmured in a low voice, I'm sorry, I accidentally overturned the coffee, but I'll remake the file immediately. Please give me the opportunity, I don't want to let the team descend. Xiaoyu glanced at him. At that moment, her shoulders froze slightly, she pulled up the pieces on her waist, and there was a stable force in her movement. Just as the tight atmosphere spread, the door of the office opened and Chinzimo walked in. His leather shoes stepped on the carpet and showed a low and grim resonance, and his steps were as steady as a swaying air. He looked at the whole scene, his eyes fixed, and walked straight towards Xiaoyu's body. Xiyu, your point is always so unique, he said, lying like a warm barrier. I won't let the internal conflicts destroy our chances. This time, I'm here to take responsibility and make everyone creative. His words calmed down, leaving only the projector's humming voice in the background. Xiaoyu turned to him, the corners of her mouth slightly raised. She flipped her diary, rubbing her lightly, and a slight whisper. The sound was like rain hitting the window, sniffing her inner courage. Okay, the experienced designer finally got together, with a sense of reluctance in his language. Although your thoughts are too naughty, if President Chen supports them, I will try it. Just don't let us fail. The team members began to gather again, and the laughter and brain strength discussions gradually rebounded. The actual student hurriedly cleaned the desktop, and his apology turned into light words in the background. The office air conditioner brought a storm, mixing the hustle and bustle of summer outside the window. It quickly reintegrated the plan and danced on the paper with fingertips. The hot-blooded colleague clapped his hands. The boss's plan is great. We keep up and win this comparison, which proves that we are the kings of the design world. His words ignited the heat in the room. Everyone's keyboard tapping sound was as dense as rain. Xiaoyu's leading power was quietly released at this moment. She didn't say much, but just adjusted the details on the projection, and there was a hint of appearance in the action. At the same time, the poisonous tongue approached Xiaoyu, and her high heels knocked on the floor with a clear rhythm, like a string of secret warnings. Xiaoyu, do you really think he is just a cold boss? She said with a light voice, full of warning. His eyes are always chasing you. I don't believe it is just work support. You have to be careful if you have any feelings. Xiaoyu was stunned, the pen in his hand stopped slightly, and her eyes swept to Chinzimo's office. The phone sounds there were low and low. He was whispering to adjust the resources, and the figure cast a long shadow under the light. Time passes by the rhythm of the office, and the sunset comes in from the window, dyeing the edges of the room. Xiaoyu and Chinzimo walked to the window, holding the diary. A smile floated on the corner of her mouth. He turned to her, his eyes deep as the lake in the night. Your creativity always shines everything. We will survive. She pointed and her breathing was slightly rapid. At that moment, the noise from the car outside the window receded, leaving only their silence like a shaped bridge beam. Their faces shone brightly in the rest of their bodies, and their heartbeat was like a hidden beat, which was suppressed by her. The real accident is like a shadow that has not dispersed, lying in the corner of the room, indicating that a larger wave is coming soon. The night was shining, and the lights on the company building were still bright, and their conversation contained unspeakable emotional explorations. Lin Xiaoyu and Chinzimo were watching each other around the window for a long time, and the air in the office seemed to solidify. The sunny sun faded away from the glass, leaving a faint red light moving around their faces. At that moment, the noise of the city outside the window became far away, and only the rhythm of the heartbeat was silent. She stretched out her hand and took out the yellow diary from her bag on her shoulder. The paper rubbed gently on the fingertips, making a slight rustling sound, like a hidden whisper, squeaking the long-lasting memories. Lin Xiaoyu's eyes fell on one of the pages, and the blurred ink of the characters reflected in her eyes. The familiar plot made her eyes softer in an instant, but it turned into a painful that was difficult to describe. She bit her lower lip, her shoulders slightly moved, trying to suppress her emotions. Chinzimo saw her movements and her eyebrows were slightly locked. He took a step, and his leather shoes made a crisp echo on the floor. His steps were already fixed, but he was suspicious, like a wind suddenly stopped. The guilt in his heart made his throat swell up and down, but he still got closer and tried to use his eyes and this invisible tightness. Yeah, he opened his voice lightly, and his voice echoed slightly in the air. What is that? Lin Xiaoyu stood up, held the diary tightly with his fingers, and his fingers turned white. She turned to Chinzimo, and the office's air-conditioning low voice added a silent pressure in the background. She took a deep breath, her chest undulated, as if she wanted to vent her pressure complaints as if she was about to exhale. You clearly agreed that we would never be separated. Her voice trembled slightly, with a sharp force. Why did you take the initiative to break the contact? Now that you are the president, do you think I am a tool that is free? I trust you so much, but if I change to this betrayal, my heart is filled with pain and distrust. As the sound fell, the air in the room seemed to be heavier. The documents on the table slid down lightly, making rustling sounds, like a slight rain hitting the lake in the heart. Chinzimo's fist was involuntarily tightened, and his fingers burst out with a slight crispness. His eyes were dodged for a moment, his throat was swallowed dryly, and his heart was filled with regret like a tide. "Show you, I didn't mean to break the relationship on purpose," he responded quickly, with a silly slut in his verbal tutoring. "I had my own difficulties at that time, but now I regret it. I feel guilty in my heart. If I want to protect you, I will always mess up everything. This battle makes me more clear. I have to reflect on the past to win back your trust." Before he could finish, she slammed her head and saw a slight light flashing in her eyes. She picked up the diary and slammed towards the table. The page flipped in the air, making a rapid whisper, accompanied by the breath of slitting beads. The lights in the office illuminated this scene with a dazzling illumination. The knocking sound of colleagues next door suddenly stopped. Everyone began to talk privately, and the deep murmurs spread like hidden waves in the room. Lin Xiaoyu's shoulders were shaking, and she turned toward the door, and her high heels rubbed the floor with continuous noises, and each step seemed to be announcing the collapse in her heart. Reflection? "It's so annoying," she said loudly, and the sound was rumbling around the corridor. "You are the high-ranking president now. I'm just a bird designer. We have long forgotten our childhood agreement. I want to prove with my own strength that I don't need your help." Her words were like an invisible knife, breaking the air and leaving a stinging rest. Chinzimo stood there in a daze, and said in a short while. His hand reached towards her, only catching the air. He took a deep breath, his chest jumped like a drum, and then chased after him. "No, yeah, listen to me," he shouted. The door slammed down, and the echo shook the entire building like a bell waking up the silence around him. He accelerated his pace in the corridor, and the sound of the leather shoes knocking in the friction of the carpet formed a rapid rhythm, but Lin Xiaoyu's back had disappeared in the corner, leaving only the sound. The lights on the floor stretched behind them, projecting a blurry shadow. Chinzimo stopped walking, leaned against the wall and gasped, his chest undulating. At this time, the phone sound of the company's building sounded harshly, interrupting his thoughts. He hurried back to the office, picked up the telephone, and his voice was barely stable. "Hey, yes, I'm Chinzimo." The phone head was coming to compete for the opponent's pressure, and his words were sharp like a knife, making his eyebrows frown. At the same time, Lin Xiaoyu had already rushed out of the office. She stopped in the corridor, leaning against the wall, and the water slid down her face. She looked down at the diary in her hand, and the paper rolled up slightly, as if mocking the passing promise. The sunny day's rest had long faded away, and the night passed through the window like ink, leaving only the lights illuminating her loneliness. She took a deep breath and tried to calm the mood. She found that her heart was still rapid, like a hidden wave tumbling inside her body. Chinzimo hung on the phone and turned back to the office. His figure stretched out under the moonlight. He looked at the diary on the table. The old photo slipped down from it, slapped on the floor, making a slight sound. It was a photo of their childhood, with a vague smile outlining the yellow edges. He pulled his waist and picked up the photo. His fingers touched the surface, feeling the texture of his old age. The moonlight shone through the glass, projecting the blurred figure of Lin Xiaoyu leaving, making his eyes deeper. At that moment, the air in the office was filled with a faint smell of ink in the coolness of the night, and the noise of the car outside the window became blurred, like a whisper in the distance. Chinzimo stood alone by the window, holding the photo tightly, and a wave of reflection was surging inside. He knew that this was not the end, but the beginning of another scene. The night was shining, and the lights on the company building were still bright. He looked out the window and tried to find the way to reconciliation in the dark. Lin Xiaoyu stood in the corridor as he stood at the beginning, and the diary in his hand was still slightly warm, as if he refused to leave that past. She wiped the dried-up marks on her face and took a few deep breaths, allowing her heart to level off from the chaotic rhythm. The night has swallowed up outside the window, and the city lights are like a flashing river, reflecting spotted light and shadow on the glass. She bit her lower lip tightly and pushed open the door of the office. The door locks lightly and clicks, like a soft awakening. The air in the corridor was filled with a sense of slight urge. She took out her phone from her bag, slid her fingertips on the screen, and cleared the number of Guanmi. The sound of the sound is rumbling in silence, accompanied by the low pricks of the remote car, making this space look particularly lonely. She leaned against the wall, her shoulders sank slightly, waiting for the familiar sound. "You're so happy." Gu Shimi's words were gentle and calm. "When you hear, you're thinking about those things again. Don't let the pain of the past hold you back, go talk to him and resolve the misunderstandings. You deserve a chance to reconnect." The words were like a warm wind whirling over, and Lin Xiaoyu's fingers couldn't help but knock on the cover of the diary. The slight knocking sound was rumbling in the corridor, like the echo of the heartbeat. She closed her eyes, flashing her childhood smile and the forgotten promise in the sea of her brain. She muttered herself at the tip, and she felt the blocks on her chest gradually relax. "You're right, I can't keep running away." After hanging on the phone, she straightened up, her steps turned to a certain point, and walked along the corridor toward the company's hall. The low buzzing of the air-conditioned fan is like a background chapter, accompanied by the design team's keyboard knock and mouse click, forming a rhythm of the job. Under the soft light, the sound of the high heels was integrated into this busyness, making her feel a hidden energy. She passed by several colleagues, who were buried in front of the screen, and the aroma of coffee drifted from the corner, mixed with a faint smell of ink, eased the tension in the air. She paused for a moment at the entrance of the hall. The clock-ticking sounds are transmitted from the wall, like urging low words. She took a deep breath and pushed Chinzimo's office door open, and the air inside was whirling and stirring, bringing a sense of urgency. Chinzimo stood by the window, and the childhood photos in his hand quietly slid down, falling lightly, making a slight sound. At that moment, the raindrops outside the window hit the glass, like a whispering far away, adding a humid atmosphere to the room. "ZMO," Lin Xiaoyu opened his mouth, his voice trembling slightly, and he was determined. "I know there were mistakes in the past, but our agreement when we were young was not in vain. I don't want to escape anymore. Let us complete this project together, and prove that we can still cooperate like we did before." Chinzimo turned around, and an accident flashed in his eyes, and his throat swelled up and down. He picked up the photo, held it in his hand, and his fingertips touched the yellow edge, as if he was savoring the days that passed. "Xiaoyu," he responded, vocalizing and stretching, "I was not meant to be indifferent. That childhood photo has always reminded me that we have never forgotten our agreement. For this project, I need your creativity to face the challenge together." She clicked her head and walked to the table, with documents rustling on the table. She opened the projector, and the buzzing sound lightly, and the light of the screen illuminated the room. Lin Xiaoyu's handwriting was compared, and the paper rubbed between her fingers and made a slight sound. She described her new design ideas, and her voice was filled with enthusiasm. "We can improve from here and incorporate more interactive elements to make the project more dynamic." Chinzimo turned forward and responded with a click. His eyes followed her movements, and the coffee machine sent a slight sound from the corner, as if it was eased into the room. The sound of the rain continued to drizzle, becoming more like the background chords, making their dialogue more closely. Just as the discussion reached orgasm, a practical student hurriedly pushed the door in with a piece of paper in his hand. He was quick to walk and accidentally knock down the water cup on the table. The water cup shattered on the floor, and the crisp sound was like a bell, causing the project data to scatter all over the floor. The sound of water drops was particularly harsh in the silence. Chinzimo's eyebrows slightly arose. He stood up and his eyes swept over the scene. "I'm sorry, boss, really conquered Baba. I just wanted to help, but I didn't expect the documents to be damaged by water. I didn't mean it." Lin Xiaoyu was stunned for a moment, then squatted down and quickly picked up the documents. The water on the floor reflected the lights, and her fingers were wet with paper, but she didn't stop. "It's okay," she said, her voice calmly carrying a warmth. "We can fix it, and that's part of the teamwork, and we'll find a way to solve it together." Chinzimo looked at her, and the corners of her mouth slightly slapped. He moved the chair, and the office chair made a slight creaking sound, symbolizing the reversal of emotions. "Yeah, thank you." This misunderstanding reminds us to be careful in every cycle, but it also allows me to see your trouble. She stood up and flipped open the diary. The page slipped gently, mixing the reminiscent of the clips. The sound of the rain was weak, and the confusing birds coming out of the window were like a sign of a new beginning. Remember? We made an appointment to create something together when we were kids, she said lightly. Now, let's continue here. The two reached a common understanding, and the lights of the office buzzed softly around them. She stretched out her hand, Chinzimo held it, and the temperature in her palm conveyed a sense of peace of mind. Outside the window, the night was dark and the city lights were still on the ground, but the atmosphere in the room was already warm. They smiled at the sight. The project documents on the table flashed under the light of the screen, and the moist documents were slightly yellow in the corner, as if they were predicting future twists and turns. The night is thick, and the fragrance of coffee is still left in the air in the room. Everything seems calm, but there is a potential ripples. Lin Xiaoyu put the wet documents lightly on the table, with the remaining water droplets on his fingertips. She took a deep breath, and the fresh air after the rain slipped in from the window, mixed with the fragrance of coffee, making the atmosphere in the office seem to wake up from the slightest bitch. The light gradually became brighter, like a soft fog covering the room. She opened her computer, and the keyboard made a crisp knock sound under her fingers. Each knock seemed to be knocking on the obstacle in her heart. She glanced at Chinzimo approaching from the window. His pace was steady and anxious. The air-conditioned voice sounded lightly, reminding the outside world of pressure like a humor. He stopped beside her and asked in a low voice, "Xiaoyu, what is your plan? We can't delay it anymore." She clicked her head and quickly sorted out her thoughts, sliding her fingers on the screen, laying the scattered data. The phone call sound was rising rapidly, and Chinzimo picked up the listening tube and notified the team to urgent meeting. His voice roared in the room, with unquestionable determination. Outside the window, the birds cried and kept silent, like hidden encouragement, coming from the night after the rain. Not long after, the group members continued to walk into the conference room. Their steps serpent on the floor, accompanied by the light friction of the chair pulling. Lin Xiaoyu stood up, the projector buzzed and started, projecting a chart of failed draft comparison. A group of light lit up in the room. She picked up the whiteboard and quickly outlined the new creativity on the whiteboard. The squeaking sound of the pen tip scratching the whiteboard aroused an invisible energy, making everyone's eyes gather involuntarily. Chinzimo sat at the end of the conference table and wrote it on the notebook. The rustling sound was as steady as a heartbeat. His eyes followed her movements, and the corners of his mouth slightly raised, expressing the promise of being open to his heart. Xiaoyu took a deep breath and began to speak. "We cannot be beaten by the failure of the draft. This is our chance to realize our childhood dreams. I want to use my creativity to drive everyone out of trouble, and prove that I am no longer the confused girl, but the leader who can lead everyone." Her words were like a warm current, injecting into the air in the room. The team members exchanged their eyes, and one of them opened his mouth. "Boss, Xiaoyu's question is really great, but what should we do?" His verb was puzzled and revealed his expectations. He smiled slowly, his eyes swept over every face. "Don't worry, everyone has the potential. Let's work together to turn the crisis into a redirect. I want to win back the trust of my customers with my sincere creativity. This is my goal and our common future." At this moment, a real student accidentally knocked over the chair and banged in the meeting room. The sound of the coffee machine ticking from the corner is like a sudden tightness. She turned her head slowly and calmed everyone down. "It's okay, let's continue." Her voice was calm, like a warm wind, pulling the atmosphere in the room back to the front. However, the light voices of internal faction members began to emerge, like fine wavy patterns spreading on the water. The crunch of the chairs rubbed with their disagreement. "This plan is too risky, will it fail?" A shadow flashed in their eyes, trying to challenge this newborn head. Chinzimo stood up and walked to Xiaoyu's body in a steady pace. His hand was lightly on the whiteboard, and the rhythm of the collision between the pen tip and the whiteboard accelerated, dispelling doubts like a war drum. "You can only gain something if you take risks. I trust Xiaoyu's judgment." This is not only for the company, but also for our unfinished promises. I want to protect her and resolve this trait." His words were like a sword, breaking the tightness in the air. Xiao Yu opened her childhood memories diary. The page was light and smooth, and the friction sound of the paper slammed into a remote memory. She paused for a moment, and the blurry image flashed in the sea of her brain, which inspired a burst of spiritual explosion. She quickly modified the design plan and added details to the whiteboard, and the sound of dancing and breathing intersected, creating a tight rhythm. The two worked together to improve the creativity, and Chinzimo's suggestions were as stable as a point. Their tacit understanding of their actions was endless, and the buzzing sound of the city lights outside the window was coming, like a call from afar. The air in the room was full of enthusiasm, and the aroma of coffee seemed to be more intense. The meeting entered the final sound, and the team members clapped their hands and said, and the thunderbolt sound of their palms was in the office, shaking everyone's heartstrings. Xiao Yu exchanged eyes with Chinzimo, and at that moment, the tacit understanding of words flashed like an electric light. Their palms touched lightly, conveying a certain temperature. When everything subsided, Xiao Yu held the final clip of the diary in his hand. The blurry image swayed slightly under the light. Chinzimo held her hand and they looked at the night view of the lights outside the window together. The buzzing sound of the city faded away, leaving behind a silence like a sign, as if the about to break out was approaching quietly. In the night, the freshness after the rain still leaves a sense of turmoil. Everything seems to be peaceful, but there is a potential ripple. Lin Xiaoyu's fingers gently touched the edges of his childhood diary, and the slightly yellow touch of the paper seemed to sniff the memory of a dusty seal. Outside the window, the street lights after the rain projected a warm light, mixed with the low-rise engine rushes from the far-flung vehicle, creating a hidden force in a quiet way. Chinzimo stood beside her, her shoulders slightly straightened, and her eyes were locked in the night. Suddenly, a vibration came from Xiaoyu's pocket, breaking the tranquility inside the room. She glanced down at the notification on the screen, and the title of the urgent email pierced like a sharp arrow. Her breathing was rapid as she slid her fingers on her phone, opening the siege from the competition company. The content of the email was simple and pointed, announcing a malicious challenge to compare the manuscript, with a proud look in the lines of the words. She stood up and walked eagerly towards the conference table. The document rustled under her touch, and with the crisp sound of the keyboard, she quickly opened her computer, and the light of the screen reflected her tight face. Chinzimo followed, his leather shoes slammed on the floor, and every step seemed to be decisive. His expression gradually changed from a cold and stern body to a certainty, and he swept across the screen with his eyes and analyzed his opponent's strategies. "We can't escape anymore," Xiao Yu said, with a decisive force in his voice. "This draft comparison is not just about work, but about the opportunity we made in childhood. I'm going to be responsible for the team and no longer let the confusion of the past be ruined." Chinzimo pointed his head and leaned his shoulders slightly towards her. His fingers pounded lightly on the document, making a rhythmic sound. "Xiao Yu, I thought coldness could protect everything, but now I understand that the real power comes from supporting you. I will do my best to keep our promises and no longer hide our inner determination." The door of the office was suddenly pushed open, and a fresh aroma of coffee swelled in. Xiao Min rushed into the hall, the coffee cup in her hand shaking, and the wall of the cup collides lightly, making a crisp sound. She called Xiaoyu's name loudly, and a warm smile appeared on her face. A group of colleagues flirted with the sliding creaking sound of the office chair and the humming hum of the low words, as if a warm current poured into the room. "Xiao Yu, don't forget the support of these friends." Xiao Min gasped, her words full of vitality, "You are not fighting alone. This time we will defeat those guys together. I want to see you shine with creativity." The colleagues gathered around, and their eyes were incorrect, and they were filled with indifferent encouragement. A colleague patted the table, his voice slightly excited. "Boss, Xiao Yu, this attack is too despicable, but our team's group will regret it. My goal is to protect the company, like family." Chinzimo walked into the file room behind the meeting room with Xiao Yu. The lights are dim, and the air is filled with dusty pressure and suppression. He pulled the file folder, rubbing the sound of the friction in the narrow space, and flipping through the old file. Her breathing became sluggish, and her fingers couldn't help but hold the diary tightly, and the soft rustling sound of the diary page accompanied her reminiscence. The content revealed in the document is like a cold wind, pointing to a business dispute that arises from childhood mistakes. Xiaoyu's eyes were slightly slight, and she recalled the blurry scene, and the inner movement quickly turned into a certainty. They returned to the meeting room and the team had moved in separate operations. Xiaoyu sat in front of the computer, the rapid sound of the keyboard striking blended with her dedicated breathing. During the design of a new plan, her fingertips danced, and the picture gradually took shape on the screen. Chinzimo picked up the phone and heard a sound. His deep response sound spread throughout the room, pointing to support. Xiaomin provides dots next to it, and the sound of scratching paper flashes like sparks. She approached her, her language was light and quick and serious. "Come on, please feel free, add this element and it will definitely make the solution more eye-catching." The tight atmosphere is upgraded in the room. Suddenly, a video conference of rivals flashed on the screen, and their laughter came from the speakers, accompanied by the sound of the document slapping the desktop, full of pride. Xiaoyu and Chinzimo met at each other and immediately joined hands to fight. Xiaoyu stood up, and his hand was scattered, and the sound of the pen tip on the paper was like a war drum. "Your tricks are just arousing our potential," Chinzimo said to the video, speaking in a speech. "We will not regress. This comparison will prove that we are truly sincere. My motor is for our common future." The air conditioning and low voice in the office creates a high-pressure feeling. She said quietly, "ZMO, thank you for your protection. Now that I am mature, let's face it together. This is not only a career battle, but also an examination of our youthful memories." The crisis gradually resolves in their instant speech. The team members shouted their greetings, their palms burst out like thunder, and they were wandering in the room. Xiaoyu's laughter is integrated into it, and it is easy to relieve it. Chinzimo held her hand, their fingertips touched lightly, and the slight friction sounded like deepening the relationship. Finally, they stood in front of the meeting room window, holding the design that had just been completed. The street lights after the rain outside the window were casting warm light, and thunder sounded from afar. Xiaoyu turned his head and looked at Chinzimo. They exchanged affectionate eyes. The silence at that moment was as quiet as an invisible bridge, connecting the past and the future. The buzzing sound of the city fades away, leaving only a subtle premonition that suggests the next challenge. Lin Xiaoyu's fingers gently held the edge of the design, and the paper was slightly shaking in his palm, as if responding to the faint thunder sound outside the window. She turned over and faced the team, her chest undulating and calming down. In the air in the meeting room, the bitter aroma of coffee is hidden, and it interacts with the fresh moisture after the rain, creating a wonderful calmness. She walked towards the projection screen, her steps were steady, and every step of the high heels knocked on the floor, like a heartbeat. Slide your finger over the remote control, clicking, the screen lights up, projecting a detailed image of the solution. In the office, the keyboard sounds of the keyboard come one after another, and the humble words of colleagues gathered in detail, and there was a sense of anxiety in the busy atmosphere. Xiaoyu's eyes swept over every familiar face, and the corners of his mouth slightly raised, without saying much. Suddenly, the door slammed and echoed in the narrow space. A rushing sound of footsteps accompanied by the rustling of documents, the opponent's representative entered, and a proud sneer was on his face. His figure stole in the door, and the documents in his hand were thrown out, and he fell on the table and made a slap. The air inside the room instantly condenses, and the ticking sound of the coffee machine far away sounds particularly harsh. "Do you think this can get over?" The opponent's verb was so sarcastic, pointing to the projection screen. "Your design was obviously stolen from us, don't want to rush over the sky." Xiaoyu stood up, a certain light flashed in his eyes. She walked towards him, and the sound of the high heels knocking on the ground was particularly bright in the silence. I took out the yellow diary from my bag, flipped it instinctively, brushed the page and touched it to the heart. Those childhood clips were like a tide, her fingers were stuck on a certain page, gently smearing the words that had not faded. The real student Xiao Ming hurriedly got up from his seat, and the notebook slid from his hand, making a sound. He picked it up tightly and turned toward Xiaoyu. "Sister Xiaoyu, the certificate I found proves your originality," Xiao Ming said excitedly, his voice trembling slightly, and his eyes were filled with the desire to grow. Chen Zimo walked over the window, and his leather shoes sounded steady and powerful, as if announcing an inactive support. He slid open the computer, and the rhythm of the keyboard hit was rapid and logical, and the data on the screen appeared quickly. The team members applauded, and the sounds of chairs scratching the floor intertwined, turning into a wave of support. "It's over," Chen Zimo's voice turned from a cold tune to warmth, and his eyes were locked in his opponent's. "The creativity of this plan comes from Lin Xiaoyu's unique vision, and I can prove everything. We have never forgotten what we made when we were young." Xiaoyu took a deep breath, turned around and faced the projector, and his fingers hit the surface, and the sound of the silence sounded like a war drum. She straightened her waist and spoke in a sincere manner. "I have dreamed of using creativity to change the world since I was a child. This plan is not a copy, but a continuation of my childhood promise. I want to win everyone's trust with sincerity." The opponent's face froze, and he retreated in embarrassment, and the bang on the door seemed like a sentence. There were laughter and chanting burst out in the office, and the atmosphere was always coming up quickly. Xiaoyu's shoulders relaxed slightly, and he crawled up to the corner of his lips with a smile. Chen Zimo reached out and held her hand, and the warm friction of the palms brushed over her like a slight wind. He pulled her closer and said in a low voice, "Xiaoyu, from now on, we are no longer pure colleagues, we are partners, the guardians of the childhood agreement." Outside the window, raindrops hit the glass. The sound was soft and continuous, as if washing everything for this moment. The scene moved to the company's hall, and the crowd surrounded them, and the atmosphere was very warm. In the background, the office broadcasts the light melody and communicates with the colleagues' fun chat sounds to form a lively picture. Xiao Ming stood aside, flipped through the notebook, and the page was rustling. He shared his experience and his language was filled with fresh passion. "I don't want to just observe this time," Xiao Ming said, looking at everyone with a firm look. "I want to be a part of the team and build the future together." Xiaoyu turned his head and looked at Chen Zimo, and their hands were still moving lightly. She smiled slightly and said lightly, "Zmo, thank you. I know we can realize that dream together." This comparison made me understand that the job is not only a competition, but also a bridge of memory. The light of the hall enters from the window, and the sunlight at noon in summer is soft and bright, bringing a sense of heartbeat. The team's laughter sounded like a dispersed shadow. Xiaoyu and Chen Zimo stood in the center, exchanging tacit eyes. At that moment, they were as calm as a shaped bridge beam, and followed by the unknown road ahead. Far away, the rainbow quietly rises, suggesting the company's future expansion and the arrival of more challenges. In the trepidation of the company's building, Lin Xiaoyu felt the warmth coming from her palm, which was tightly held by Chen Zimo's hands. The laughter of the team members stormed like waves, and the sounds around them were like an instant symphony. Xiao Ming stood far away, smiling so hard that his eyes turned into crescent moons, and his colleagues' casual chats formed a lively picture. The sun shone down from outside the window, illuminating the confusing rainbow after the rain, as if announcing the arrival of a new chapter. Xiaoyu's hand slid into the bag and found the yellow diary. The page rustled lightly at the fingertips, instantly pulling out the ripples in her heart. She pulled it out slowly and lifted it up for Chen Zimo to see it. His eyes stopped on the familiar cover, his breathing deepened slightly, as if the echo of the old day was coming out of the paper. The noise of the team gradually faded into the background, and the aroma of coffee drifted from afar, mixed with the refreshing breath after the rain, making this moment look particularly calm. A blurry picture unfolded in front of her eyes, like a whirlpool of time. She saw herself back to her childhood, the afternoon in the yard. The sun is on the grass, and the birds are clamoring and free, and the wind is swaying in the slightest wind. When he was a child, Chen Zimo stood beside her, her eyes filled with childish determination. They held hands and reiterated that simple and serious agreement, when they grew up, they would start a company together and change the world. The picture fades away like a thin fog, returning to reality. The background music of the company's building turned into a soft piano melody, like an echo of a heartbeat, calming her thoughts. Xiaoyu sent the diary to Chinzimo, and his fingers touched the cover lightly, and flipped the yellow pages together. Spots of sunlight reflected on the old photos or projected on their faces, bringing a warm touch. Chinzimo's breathing became deeper. He looked at the surrounding public environment, and the knocking sound of the keyboard was transmitted from time to time, accompanied by the swift flight of the coffee machine, creating a kind of workplace movement. Xiaoyu felt his fingers tighten slightly, and the action was self-evident, as if it was saying that everything was worth it. They walked towards the rooftop of the company together, and when the door opened, they made a slight creaking sound, like a door leading to freedom. The pylon is surrounded by the city scenery, and the buzzing sound of the car rises from below, mingling the lightness of the birds far away. The slight wind blew over, bringing the rustling leaves. I took a deep breath and felt the air was filled with freshness after the rain. She turned to Chinzimo, and he held her hand tightly, with a fixed light flashing in his eyes. "We did it," Xiaoyu said lightly, with a lingering aftertaste in his language. She looked at him and the corner of her mouth slightly said, "Zmo, we have made a promise to start a company together since we were young, and now we have done it. I thought I was just a confused bird, but I didn't expect my vision to lead everyone out of crisis. This is not just work, but our childhood commitment." Chinzimo's eyes softened, and his usually cold face was now like melting ice and snow. "Yeah," he said, his voice low and warm. "I always look cold on the surface, but in fact, I am trying to protect that inner promise. I have always remembered our agreement over the years, and now I have completely liberated myself. We are not only building a design empire, but also facing future challenges together. You are my eternal partner." Their conversation dissipated in the tiny wind of the sun, and he felt a warm current rising from the bottom of his heart. She flipped through the page of her diary and slid her fingertips over the old words. "Zmo, after I opened this review diary, I realized that the past traces pointed to the present. Our love and career are in harmony. I would like to create more beautiful memories with you." Not long afterwards, they returned to the meeting room. The team members have gathered, and the atmosphere is warm and full of vitality. Xiaoyu led the discussion. She picked up the pen and planned it on the whiteboard. The scratching sound was like a rhythmic drum, which emphasized her leadership. Xiao Ming and other colleagues echoed, applauded, and the slight summer wind outside the window brought the soft sway of the leaves. Chinzimo stood aside, with a smile on the corner of his mouth, his existence as a stable pillar. "Sister Xiaoyu, President Chen, you are really our list." Xiao Ming said excitedly, and his eyes surpassed everyone. "Our team will continue to work hard and turn the company into a design empire together." After the meeting, they returned to the sun. The sunset is sunken, and the night lights in the city begin to light up, emitting a soft buzzing light. Chinzimo suddenly stopped walking, took a deep breath, and took out a small box from his pocket. The sound of clicking sound came out when the box opened. At that moment, Xiaoyu's heartbeat seemed to be knocked by a breeze. She saw the ring flashing in the sunny sky, her eyes slid unconsciously, and a drop slipped gently and melted into the air. Chinzimo knelt on his knees and held her hand. "Xiao, from the day you entered the company, I knew that this was a fateful arrangement. I love you not because of my childhood, but because you made me better. Marry me, let's write a new chapter together." Xiaoyu's purgation blurred the visual line. She pulled him up and the two hugged each other tightly. The night view of the city spreads behind them, and the lights are as flashing as stars. The memoir diary is closed lightly and the last rustling sound comes out, like a sentence point. They stood on the edge of the sun, gazing at this sea of lights. Far away, the building of the design company under the starry sky shines brightly, indicating endless possibilities in the future. The slightest wind continued to sway, and everything seemed to have just begun.